Hello and welcome to the Cowboy Culture Podcast. This is episode number 1 in the beginning of a series I've decided to call Forging a Legacy. I have a huge passion for the American quarter horses we know and ride today, most of all the little squatty ones that are bred to watch and hold a cow. And while I enjoy riding them over all else, I find a lot of joy in studying the history of these horses. Now, anyone can dive into this topic and talk about the horses we're riding right now, but in order to get a good idea of where we are, we had better take a look back at where we've been. You can't tell a good story unless you start at the beginning, so let's go back, way back, and see what we can find out about the founding sires of the horses we love. This is Forging a Legacy, episode number 1. Now, I don't know how many of you have tried to make a living horseback, but personally, I've spent countless hours just me and a horse, and it's amazing where your mind can go. And if I'm being truthful, I know for a fact that this story has never crossed my mind. I've never thought about horses such as the Godolphin Arabian, and I never really cared about what the Redcoats were doing with their horses in the 1700s. As far as I'm concerned, those powder-headed bigwigs couldn't handle a rope anyways, so why would I worry what they were up to? Now, upon diving into this topic a little bit deeper, I find that thank goodness the Founding Fathers were interested in fast horses, or we'd still be trying to head the first runaway Longhorn we pointed towards Dodge City. It can be easy to say what you like or dislike about a horse that's standing right in front of you. You might even be able to tell me your horse's family tree for generations, but I've yet to meet someone that can give a history lesson on quarter horses older than the United States itself. If you're anything like me, I don't bother with much history before July 4th, 1776. But we're going to have to go back a bit further. I want you to think about the trait of a horse that's important to you. Is it their speed or agility? Or is it how they stop and turn around? Or maybe for you, it's how strong they are to the saddle horn. Regardless of your requirements of good horse flesh, I think you ought to know about an old Englishman named Janus. Janus was foaled in England in 1746. His sire had gone by the same name, and his mother was a daughter of a horse named Fox. Janus already had quite the family reputation, for his grandfather was the aforementioned Godolphin Arabian, a stallion born in Yemen in 1724, and raised by the Bedouin people. The Bedouin are a desert nomad, ranging from North Africa throughout the Middle East. I bet while you're jingling your spurs listening to this, it's hard to compare yourself to these desert nomads. But by the time Janus was born, these people had been herding livestock, riding and raising fast horses for at least a couple thousand years. To me, it's not a far-off idea to say that if you change their outfits, add a little silver and turquoise, that these people aren't much different from the Navajo of the Southwest, a horse culture that herded sheep and thrived in the Mesa country of the Four Corners area. Or hell, take out the fences and the personal property. Are the cowboys and ranchers of today that much different? Do they not embody that same free-ranging spirit and that self-sufficient attitude? Yeehaw! Godolphin was swapped to the Bay of Tunis, then gifted to the French, and finally brought to England by Edward Coke. Now, a man named Francis Godolphin took ownership and gave him his name. And now we're raising racehorses. This Arabian is credited with being one of the founding fathers of the thoroughbred breed and deserves an episode all on his own. But I want to jump ahead in the story and get us a little bit closer to using these horses for what God intended. And mister, you know it's for working cows. Okay, back in Janus's world, it's 1746, we're in England, and there's a new colt on the ground with no idea in the world where he's headed. He doesn't know about oceans or ships or even horse racing, but this little horse was born to change the world. The man that raised him was an English member of Parliament, and for those of you who don't know, that's a congressman in the old country, Anthony Langley Swimmer. He started some of the early jockey clubs in England and had a bit of a passion for racehorses. He raised this horse that was said to be small, agile, big-hipped, smart, and most importantly, fast. Sounds a lot like something we might be hunting for today. All right, a little bit of time passes by, and that little colt grows up to running age. Anthony starts entering him some races. He even has a few recorded wins on a 4-mile track, but only had 2 years of racing before he came up sore. And it was looking like he was headed for an early retirement, which is a sad deal for Anthony, but a great deal for you and me because this little sawed-off chestnut was up for trade. He changes hands a few times before Janus is aboard a ship in 1752, bound for Virginia, having no idea that he's headed for an American racing culture that's over 100 years old. Early colonial Virginia horse racing was an upper-class affair, mostly ran by Spanish descendant mares. In the late 1600s, a working man caught trying to organize a match race could find himself talking to the law. But for the elite, it was completely acceptable to talk trash about who had the faster horse and get a match set up right down Main Street or out in front of the bar. Most times men rode their own horses and took part in what sounds to me like a cross between a match race and a barroom brawl. The only image I have in my mind is the Mexican match races all along our southern border. I could see the common folk see, with blotches of rich men leading their prize stock to the starting line. Take out the taco hats and the exotic boots, trade it for a bunch of pirate outfits. I think it'd be pretty close to the same. Okay, while all this is going on, there's another race culture growing all on its own. We have our sire, but if we're going to make babies and create a breed, we need some ovens to cook them in. And lo and behold, there just happens to be some mares in the southeastern U.S. In 1539, Hernando de Soto, a Spanish conquistador, landed in Florida with 200 head of horses, mostly to be barb horses. And before he could get them loaded up and started back for home, he found himself in a conflict with the Chickasaw tribe. Well, and they sent him home with a lot less horses than he showed up with. Apparently, the Spanish had offended their new acquaintances, demanding couriers and women. Well, it wasn't long before the Chickasaw found a use for these horses. They used them for everything a group of people might use a horse for. They used them for travel, work, and thankfully play. The Chickasaw liked to run their horses also, and built the first quarter-mile tracks to run them on. They were mostly about 13 hands and agile, but stout enough to pull a plow. Now we're starting to get the ingredients for a huge pot of quarter-horse stew. Now all we got to do is let the Chickasaw marinate their breeding program for a couple hundred years and we'll really have something. Old Janus finds his ship docking, and he's received by Mildred Willis. Willis rests him up a spell and gets a little stud sound enough to run the new 4-mile track that's been set up by the newly founded jockey clubs. Dollar-wise, it's hard to say how much Janus won in his career, but there are records of Janus winning several races in Virginia and North Carolina. The real value for this little horse is yet to come, and his biggest contribution is in the next chapter of his life, as a sire. Now the little chestnut gets traded again, and this time to the would-be American colonel in the American Revolutionary War, Jephthah Atherton. Atherton was a farmer, politician, but most importantly a racehorse enthusiast. He had a breeding and horse training facility that was the first of its kind in North Carolina. But he didn't raise horses for sport alone. He also provided mounts for the upcoming revolution. Times were changing in the horse business. Breeding was becoming more important. We needed to travel fast and be quick-footed when we got there, be that on the track, battlefield, or just hunting up some food. People began bringing mares from all over to breed the Janus. a majority of the mares being the very Chickasaw mares that had been evolving for the last couple hundred years. Adds a perfect counterpart to the newly arrived thoroughbreds that the bigwigs were so proud of. I'd like to think that Paul Revere was aboard an early quarter horse, own son of Janus, as he thundered down the cobblestone the night the shot was heard around the world. The British are coming, and so are the quarter horses, and Call Me Mitch isn't very far behind. Let's whip the hell out of the Englishmen and get things set up so cowboys can grow here. If you were walking down the street in North Carolina town around 1774, you might see a flyer hanging in a tavern window showing a drawing of a stout little chestnut horse, with lines below describing him as very fat and active as a lamb. While standing in North Carolina, Janus covered a few hundred mares and changed horse flesh forever. 9 of the 11 original families of the American quarter horses were direct descendants of Janus. Hey, good on you, partner. Thanks for all the work that you did. Janus had one more trade in his future, and this time it was to a Virginia senator. He sent 150 pounds and instructions to have the horse delivered. I guess they figured the old man could make the trip, but he couldn't, because Janus died en route. He was 34 years old and left a legacy that still affects us to this very day. Hey, I hope you made it this far, and I hope that a look back in time gives you a little bit more appreciation for the horses we love. So take an extra second to watch your horses eat while you're feeding this evening, and look at the history behind their eyes and say, man, what a ride. Thank you for listening to the Cowboy Culture Podcast. Please rate and review and let me know what you want to hear more about. Adios.